All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, if you're reading the writing on the wall, it looks more and more like Pro Bowl wide receiver Davante Adams may have played his final game for the Las Vegas Raiders. You see, you heard or and listened to and saw Adams' chilling interview today on the Up and Adams show, where he let it be known that he has not spoken to Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce ever since Pierce, accordingly, or at least Pierce's account or an account linked to Pierce on Instagram, liked the post about the star receiver possibly having played his last down of football for the Raiders. The writing was on the wall, and at the end of the day, do the Raiders want to continue to have an unhappy camper on their roster, or will they simply move on from him? I'll tell you like this: if the Raiders are really willing and intending to trade Adams, what teams around the National Football League would make the most sense? Well, I would say Buffalo because Buffalo needs a wide receiver, a top tier guy, but it's one of those where you know what? Buffalo's cap situation led to them blowing it up last year, and they're kind of still in cap purgatory. So I think that would be a long shot as best. Alejandro, what is going on, my brother? You're saying he's going to the Saints. I'll tell you like this: that would be nice, to see him reunite once more with Derek Carr, just for the simple fact that it was like, hey, that's basically why he ended up one of the reasons, at least, why he ended up coming to the Raiders in the first place, because he wanted to play with his former wide receiver who was throwing him the football for Fresno State. I'm also going to throw the Baltimore Ravens out there because you know what? The Ravens do need themselves a receiver. Of course, a lot of people are talking about the New York Jets. I think the Jets could be a possibility as well. Um, it's one of those where obviously all of the time that he spent, with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, and of course, the Jets are in win now mode. You're saying the wide receivers coach is his best friend. I would imagine you're talking about in New Orleans. Alejandro, please chime in on that one. Also, I'm going to put in, the Dallas Cowboys because Dallas needs to make, some type of move. They've got CD Lamb, but they need somebody to take some of the pressure, if you will, off of CD in the receiving game with Dallas. Pull that off. I think it's going to be a long shot. Alejandro, you might be onto something right there as far as him going to New Orleans. It makes a lot of sense because you look at it. He has a lot of chemistry with Derek Carr. Okay. Then on top of that, you look at that NFC South rather, very winnable division. It's one of those where the Bucks are in first place right now. The Saints are 2-2. The Falcons are 2-2. Panthers are 1-3. I know the Panthers made the move to Andy Dalton, but you know what? At the end of the day, you really don't expect a lot from the Panthers this year. It's a winnable division, and the Saints have been there in each of the last couple of years. And honestly, I'll tell you like this: it might not take as much to get Davante Adams as people would want to think because he has a contract that is going to need to be restructured. Because I would imagine for Davante to go to another team, he's going to look to restructure that deal and get paid. And then you're going to have to give the Raiders draft compensation, which some teams around the NFL can do. But and it's going to be interesting to see, hey, which team's going to pull the trigger. I'll tell you like this: I know that there are people out there throwing out the notion of saying that maybe the Kansas City Chiefs can get Davante Adams, after the Rasheed Rice injury. I'll tell you like this: no way in the world. I mean, we're talking about Chiefs Raiders. We're talking about AFC West. They are not making that the trade within that division. More than likely, typically you would see teams try to make trades to the other conference. I think there's more teams, to me, in my opinion, in the AFC than the NFC that could be suitors for Davante Adams. But nonetheless, I do believe sooner rather than later, if you read the writing on the wall, I think he's gone. The ups and downs for Antonio Pierce so far as the Raiders head coach. Of course, he took over as the interim guy last year for Josh McDaniels. This team did rally around AP as their head coach, and I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think Davante was one of the guys that went to bat for Antonio Pierce with team owner Mark Davis as far as giving Antonio Pierce the full time job. And of course, Antonio Pierce had that blow up a couple of weeks ago after the Raiders' shocking home losses. They were flat out dominated by the Carolina Panthers. And of course, he had some subliminal messages himself in his post game press conference, some of the things he's going on to apologize for since then. But nonetheless, we did see the Raiders play much harder. We did see the Raiders be much more competitive this past Sunday in their win over the Cleveland Browns, sans Max Crosby and Davante Adams. But nonetheless, I think it's growing pains for a head coach. Relating his message across to his team. And at the end of the day, I think Antonio Pierce, you know, is I think he's an old school guy. He played under Tom Coughlin with the Giants. He has a no nonsense attitude, so to speak. He's got Marvin Lewis and some other former head coaches on his staff. But nonetheless, it is and it will be a learning process. You're saying AP is being used for, imagine he's not calling the shots. Um, I think, it's one of those where it's his team, yes, but, first time head coach. And, sometimes first time head coaches, you know, old school mentality, they might rub some of the new school guys the wrong way. I think back to when Mike Singletary became the head coach of the 49ers. And of course, he had that infamous, tirade with Vernon Davis, I think in his first full game when he was the interim head coach. But nonetheless, I think once he got the full time gig, him and Troy Smith got into it. And of course, he was wavering, going one day, Troy Smith is starting quarterback, then Alex Smith, and then, of course, the rest was history. And then, of course, Jim Harbaugh came in there and turned things around for the 49ers. But I think it's a growing pains for Antonio Pierce. But then on top of that, the Raiders, even coming into the season, the Raiders are not a player away. Okay. They wanted to get a quarterback in the first round of the draft. And you had a situation where Denver got ahead of Oakland and Oakland, sorry, Vegas. um, and they took Bo Nix. So then we saw the Raiders take Brock Bowers, who's I think is going to be a phenomenal player. And me personally, I was looking forward to seeing Brock Bowers play with Davante Adams, but it looks like we saw it briefly, but I don't think it's going to happen in the long term here. The Raiders, they still got to get a quarterback going forward. I think Gardner Minshew is a stopgap guy, and they've got to put pieces together. It looked like they were drafting right for a while when Jack Del Rio was still calling the shots or a part of it, when they were in Oakland. And then when John Gruden came in, and then, of course, the rest is history. And then whatever was being built, Josh McDaniels, in a fashion that only Josh McDaniels can do, just look at what he did with Denver, came in and flat out destroyed it. So now the Raiders are starting over. If you're the Raiders, I think, you got to make it happen, because if Davante Adams truly does not want to be there, I think it's a scenario where, for everybody involved, it doesn't make sense to have an unhappy camper around. Could they be able to smooth things over? I'm not going to say no, but I ain't holding my breath at the same time on it. So I want to see when this happens. I think it does happen sooner rather than later. If it doesn't happen this week, because we're already, into Tuesday, I don't see teams possibly making a move now, but maybe uh, for the following week. Of course, the trade deadline has now been extended in the National Football League. I definitely think that we're going to see Davante Adams suiting up for another NFL team in the coming days. Keith Williams, Alejandro, is saying enters his first season with the New Orleans Saints, where he will tutor the team's wideouts after spending the previous 3 seasons on the Baltimore Ravens offensive coaching staff. You're also saying prior to joining the Ravens in 2021, the Stockton, California native came to the National Football League, having 18 years of coaching experience at the collegiate level while also working as of personnel. Wide receivers coach for a number of top NFL wideouts, including all pros, Davante Adams and Tyreek Hill. Well, I'll tell you what, you with that tidbit right there, again, like you said before, I think you're on it. Let's see if the New Orleans Saints go out there and make that move. You got a situation, you got your college quarterback in Derek Carr. And then on top of that, like you're saying, you have somebody, as a position coach that you are extremely familiar with. And I know that a lot of people are talking Jets, and it makes a lot of sense because Davante Adams, put up some big numbers on the receiving end of passes from Aaron Rodgers. But whereas Davante Adams could probably complete Aaron Rodgers' sentences for him, there's another guy out there that Davante Adams could do the same thing with, and it's Derek Carr. Go back and look at the tape. It's one of those where Davante and Aaron Rodgers, excuse me, Derek Carr had a lot of success together at Fresno State in the Mountain West. You're saying Aaron doesn't know if he wants to play football. Well, we saw him host Jeopardy. You know what? That's a whole nother thing. The Jets offense, it looked bad on Sunday. A lot of that, I'll give them a pass for the weather, and I'll also say that Denver has a good defense. But I'll also say this: I think the Jets are going to be a work in progress throughout this season, and I think they are going to be a typical Aaron Rodgers types team. If you go back all of those years when Aaron Rodgers was a starting quarterback for the Packers, they always started slow. September and October was a feeling out time. Typically, end of October, beginning of November is when they got it going, and you know what? They made those runs into the postseason. But hey, just thinking of it, a Devontae Adams trade to the Jets, maybe that could be a rallying cry for this team, but it also could be a rallying cry for the New Orleans Saints. Why? Because, like I said before, the NFC South, extremely winnable. I mean, we've seen teams with losing records or close to losing records in the last couple of years win this division. So if you're the Bucks, if you're the Saints, if you're the Falcons, you got to go into this thing and say, hey, you know what? All we need is maybe 9 wins, 10, and for darn sure, we'll go out there and win this thing. The Saints are 2-2, tough losses to the Eagles, and then of course to the Atlanta Falcons this past Sunday, where they didn't even allow an offensive touchdown. Okay, but a guy like Devontae would give them a stud at wide receiver, so it's going to be very interesting to see if and how this thing works out. But nonetheless, you look at it, the writing is on the wall. It's October 1st today. If Davante Adams is still with the silver and black in 2015, pardon me, past October 15th, rather, I would be extremely surprised. I think he's still going to be doing his Taco Bell commercials. It's just a matter of what team that he's going to be repping while he does those Taco Bell commercials. And I guess, as the commercials go, he'd have to find a new crib to put the Taco Bell in. So we'll see what happens. But nonetheless, Devontae will be on the move real soon. But folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. I'm thinking about Davante Adams. Please forgive me there for a minute. Alejandro, I'm taking it that you're a Saints fan, please correct me if I am wrong. But if you are, I want to ask you this question right now. How do you feel about the Saints' chances on Monday night going into Arrowhead and taking on the two-time defending champs in the Kansas City Chiefs? Definitely, please feel free to hit me in the chat box for that one. I definitely want to hear your take on that contest. But nonetheless, folks, My name is William Martin. I'm signing off and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.